Well, folks, an entire decade has officially passed. Wow. I cannot believe it's almost 2020. We are almost at the end, the very end of the decade and the beginning of a new one. It feels like 2010s or even the early 2010s wasn't that long ago. Jeez, time really goes by fast. The 2010s were a decade of many highs and lows, but most especially highs. For the first time ever, I have a catalog of YouTube videos for a whole decade. Yes, I started in 2007, but that was at the tail end of the 2000s. I could never give you a best of Allie-RX of the 2000s since there was only a few years. But now things are different. There's enough content for a whole decade that we can now do a best of Allie-RX from the 2010s. From 2007 to 2009, those were the years where I would establish myself as a YouTuber. However, the 2010s was the decade of change. It was the first time where I would diversify my content with retrospectives, more positive game reviews, more other types of reviews, just more gaming videos in general, more other types of videos, and just other stuff beyond awful games, bootleg shit, things of that nature. My channel also went through so much evolution during the past decade, it's crazy. Anyway, let's break down some of my best and most notable videos going from each year, from 2010 all the way to 2019, this year. In 2010, I started off with more of the same from 2009. I released my review of Kamen Rider Dragon Knight for the Wii, as well as the bootleg shit episode of Fighting Hero. You also saw bootleg shit episodes of Super Contra X.
Oh my god, what the fuck did they do to Contra?
And at the end of the year, we saw the bootleg shit episode of the Donkey Kong game called Zhang Chuan, whatever the hell it's called. And of course there was that Super Mario Bros. April Fool's Day episode. But my most notable review series of that year was AKI Pro Wrestling 64. A retrospective where I covered all the best wrestling games on the Nintendo 64 developed by the AKI Corporation, now Sin Sophia. But of course I only covered 2 episodes that year. Them being WCW vs NWO World Tour / Virtual Pro Wrestling 64 and WCW NWO Revenge. Sadly, the other 2 episodes were delayed, but the delay was well worth the wait. Early 2011 saw the releases of the final 2 episodes, WWF WrestleMania 2000 and WWF No Mercy. Overall, the AKI Pro Wrestling 64 retrospective was very well received, and you can expect a remake of this series sometime in the very near future. For the spring of 2011, I released another retrospective, but this time it was a little bit shorter. This was the Super Sentai Games retrospective. Here I cover 5 Super Sentai games since they were the only Sentai games released at the time. Jetman for the Famicom, Zyuranger also for the Famicom, Car Ranger for the Super Famicom, Gao Ranger for the PlayStation, and Hurricaneer also for the PlayStation. And after a nearly 2-year hiatus, I uploaded my first awful games review of the 2010s. And that was Pit Fighter for the Super Nintendo. 2 more awful games episodes were released during the spring and summer, that being Mario's Time Machine for the Super Nintendo and the Three Stooges for the NES. For the summer of 2011, I introduced a short-lived rant series called Let's Rant About Something. The first episode wasn't really about gaming at all, it was actually about the end of the world, but the second episode was about Capcom, since the company was doing so many bad decisions at the time. For the remainder of 2011, I would release Mighty Morphin Gundam Rangers, the Wii Reviews episode of Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth, the 2 Fire Pro Wrestling games on the Game Boy Advance, and Fire Pro Wrestling Returns for the PlayStation 2. The year would conclude with my controversial Awful Games episode of Sonic 3D Blast for the Sega Genesis, aka Sonic 3D Flicky's Island for the Mega Drive. 2012 was a milestone as it was my YouTube channel's 5th anniversary. That said, there wasn't a lot of content that year, but the little content there was pretty damn good. As such, most of my reviews were remakes of old reviews from 2007. Looking back, I kinda regret making those, but it is what it is. And some people do enjoy the remakes as well. These were Sonic Labyrinth for the Game Gear, Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis for the Game Boy Advance, and Mortal Kombat Advance. 3 of my most popular Awful Games episodes from 2007. In the fall of 2012, I released 2 bootleg shit episodes, and these were the dreadfully bad Sonic Adventure 7 and Sonic 3D Blast 5 for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. And of course, 2012 would end with my epic review of Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. It was the angriest I have ever been. I completely destroyed that game and Sonic Genesis for the Game Boy Advance with my own bare hands. It was the perfect series finale for my Awful Games review series. But was it really the end? 2013 was the beginning of a new era. With Awful Games ending, it was time to reboot my YouTube channel. Though bootleg shit still continued. The first episode that year was Kart Fighter for the Famicom. And in lieu of Awful Games was the debut of a brand new series called the Allie-RX Show, where I review just about any game, good or bad, while being on camera at the beginning and end of each video. 5 episodes were released that year, them being Transformers War for Cybertron, WWE 13, Batman Arkham Asylum, Kamen Rider Battle Roar for the PlayStation 3, and Namco Cross Capcom for the PlayStation 2. 2 more episodes of bootleg shit were released that year as well, them being Superboy 2 for the MSX and Sega Master System during the summer, and Super Mario World for the Famicom in November for Thanksgiving. Finally, I would release the 3rd retrospective I have ever created, Kamen Rider games, broken down into 4 parts: Famicom, Super Famicom, and Game Boy for Episode 1, Sega CD and Sega Saturn for Episode 2, PlayStation for Episode 3, and PlayStation 2 for Episode 4, minus Climax Heroes, which I'm saving for another retrospective coming next year. Moving on to 2014, now the beginning of that year was pretty rough for me, and those of you who are longtime subscribers who were watching me at the time already know what happened. But in terms of content, there was definitely plenty. The original Allie-RX Show series ended with what was known as Retro Month. Originally intended for January, it was delayed because, like I said, the beginning of that year was pretty bad for me. These episodes were Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3: The Manhattan Project for the Nintendo Entertainment System, Nights in the Dreams for the Sega Saturn, and Bad Dudes for the NES and arcade. During the summer that year, I released the bootleg shit episode of what was known as Mortal Kombat Trilogy 5. And in August of that year, I will release the first episode of what I retroactively call the Allie-RX Show 2.0. And the first episode of that was WWE 2K14. There weren't many episodes released that year, but 2014 concluded with the first ever Versus episode, and to date, it's the only Versus episode so far. That being Super Mario Bros. 3 vs. Super Mario World. Now we come to the latter half of the decade, starting with 2015. The year started off with the bootleg shit episode of Super Mario Special 3 for the Game Boy Color, released on my birthday actually. In March, I would release the next episode of the Allie-RX Show 2.0, that being my review of DuckTales Remastered. 2 reviews were released in June of that year, the first being the bootleg shit episode on Angry Birds. Yeah, there was a bootleg Angry Birds. And second, the Allie-RX Show episode on Super Sentai Battle Ranger Cross, a big disappointment and a Wii exclusive. The third and final episode of the Allie-RX Show for 2015 would be the sequel to Kamen Rider Battle Roar. It was uploaded in August. Speaking of which, I gotta do a review of the third game sometime. The final review of 2015 would be the bootleg shit episode of Biohazard for the Famicom, and that's the 8-bit bootleg Resident Evil. There were a couple of quick reviews released during the end of that year as well: Kung Fury Street Rage, Sonic 1 and 2 for iOS and Android, and Super Mario Maker for the Wii U. But I don't think they're as memorable as my other videos that year. For 2016, I really didn't upload a whole lot that year, as I was getting ready for my YouTube channel's 10th anniversary, as well as I had to deal with other stuff in my personal life. There were only literally 3 reviews that year, that whole year, and they were 3 episodes of the Allie-RX Show 2.0, that being J-Star's Victory vs. Plus for the PlayStation 3, Transformers Devastation, and the GameCube exclusive, also in my opinion, the greatest survival horror game of all time, Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem. 2017 was a great year, as it was my YouTube channel's 10th anniversary, so I had to do something special, and on December 31st, 2016, I announced in a trailer that Awful Games was returning for the first time in 5 years. But of course that would not happen until the summer that year. In the beginning of 2017, the first review I did was the bootleg shit episode on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for the Famicom. And there would not be a new video until the summer, July of 2017, where I would post my final episode of the Allie-RX Show, and that it was the Modern Sonic Retrospective, which was a prequel to the new Awful Games episode, and that it was Sonic Boom for the Wii U. That same month, the second episode of Bootleg Shit was released, and that was the Famicom bootleg version of The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. For my last 2 reviews of 2017, I would post the Bootleg Shit episode on Sonic Jam 6 for the Sega Mega Drive, and the Awful Games episode on WCW Nitro and WCW NWO Thunder, both for the PlayStation. For 2018, things started to calm down a bit, but it was a pretty solid year, and there was plenty of content for Bootleg Shit fans. There are a total of 5 episodes, 5 Bootleg Shit episodes released in 2018. That being the Dragon Ball Games Retrospective, which was the first retrospective for Bootleg Shit since Pokemon in 2008. Then the review of Tomb Raider in March, the review of Iron Man in May, Terrifying 9/11 on September 11th, and Iraq War 2003 in November. But the most notable video of 2018 was done to commemorate the 25th anniversary of Power Rangers, and that was the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Games Retrospective, covering every single game based on the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers series released on the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Game Gear, Game Boy, and even the recent one, Mega Battle. Finally, we come to 2019. Now, there really isn't a whole lot of content here, to be honest, and I wish there was more, but it is what it is. I started off with an April Fool's episode of Awful Games, and that was Dark Souls. My first actual review was in July, and that was the Bootleg Shit episode of Spider-Man. Finally, this was the review I did a couple of weeks ago, and that was the review of Alien Isolation. So, that's all of my reviews from 2010 to 2019. Now I want to know, what are your guys' top 10 videos of mine from 2010 to 2019? You can always go back to the videos if you want, but keep in mind there are some re-uploads released this year, some of which were originally made in the late 2000s, originally uploaded in the late 2000s. So those don't count as 2010's reviews. Anyway, I'm gonna end this video by saying thank you to all of my fans and subscribers who are still with me and have stuck with me since the very beginning, or if they're new subscribers and are still around, thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for enjoying my videos. Thank you for appreciating what I've done in the past decade, and I really, really appreciate it. Anyway, I'm Allie-RX, and I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Holidays, Happy whatever the hell you celebrate, and Happy New Year 2020, and Happy New Decade. I promise you, I guarantee you, the next year will be something special. This year was just me focusing on my health and such, but next year, I am definitely ready to make a comeback. See you in the new year. If you like this video and want to see more, hit that subscribe button and hit the bell to get immediately notified on the latest videos. If you like my content and want to support me, you can donate to my Patreon for just $1 a month. Go to patreon.com/Allie-RX or search Allie-RX on the Patreon app for mobile devices. If you prefer a one-time donation, you can donate to my PayPal at paypal.me/Allie-RX or send to allierx@gmail.com on the PayPal app for mobile devices. There, you can donate any amount, even a penny. Links are in the description.